Thank you so much for having myself and Katie tonight. It really is a privilege to speak to you guys, fellow adventurers and exploration people. My name is Stephen Hoffe. This is Katie, as we've been introduced to you. We were told to come and do a talk. I don't know if my face is visible on Zoom, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we've checked it. It should be good.
Okay.
We have checked.
On a climb that turned into a rescue that happened in April earlier this year on Cathedral Rock in the Transkei. My plan for the night for this presentation is to just do a sort of overview of what Mpondoland is, where it is, what it's about, sort of zoom in on that a bit further and talk just briefly about my history into the place and how I got there, how I fell in love with it, and how I've been working in that environment for the last sort of decade or so, and then zoom in even further into the Cathedral Rock peak itself, the climb, the planning, the incident, which Katie will talk us through, seeing as she was on the sharp end, as we call it. And then we will sort of discuss the rescue and how it happened, and then open up to Q&A after that for the final minutes. So first up is Mpondoland. It's a part of South Africa in the former Transkei. It kind of bridges an area between Port Edward and Port St. John's, stretching about 150, 200 k's inland. It's a very unique part of South Africa in that it kind of even has its own language. The Mpondo language is a mix between Xhosa and Zulu, and was kind of part of the Transkei Bantustan. There was a Pondo revolt in the 1960s where the community got together and refused to be assimilated into the apartheid South Africa and were granted permission to be part of the Transkei Bantustan. So it's a very rich, unique area that has actually remained quite isolated for quite a long time, which sort of keeps it as a bit of a time capsule of days gone by in terms of rural South Africa. And it's really made up of rural subsistence land, farming communities, very close-knit communities, and very beautiful, large rolling hills with lots of livestock and agriculture. And it's in this landscape where I got to know it and fall in love with it, and then essentially got to find places like Cathedral Rock. It's also a place of incredible beauty. These are the sort of typical scenes you have out there. This really gives you a sense of what it's like. Everyone is looking out for each other, looking after themselves, making their own food, grazing their own cattle. And then people like myself have been involved in the community for a while, helping with various projects and stuff. This is a sort of typical view of the coastline, various estuaries, beautiful beaches, stretching. The whole wild coastline is really a stunning place that is also very largely under threat as a result of things like mining and toll road developments and stuff, which I can talk briefly on as well, but won't too much. Of course, it is the wild coast. It is a beautiful place for its wildlife, the oceans. I'm sure you've all heard of the Shell seismic blasting that was happening recently. It was the Amadiba Crisis Committee, which is in the area that I work specifically with, which took the Shell to court and won and got them to stop their seismic blasting. They sank their teeth into the whole environmental and conservation thing when they've been fighting against dune mining in the area for the past 2 decades. So they're very, very keen to look after their environment. And it, of course, is a wild place. I mean, it's not called the Wild Coast for nothing. The shoreline, there's very few actual beaches. It's mainly rocky shelves, huge steep cliffs, which is, of course, where Cathedral Rock can be found, and then very deep river gorges with lots of exploring to do, lots of massive waterfalls, huge spaces, and lots of things to actually find and discover. So my history in the place comes from, now I run the Pondo Experience, which is a adventure and community development project in the Transkei. And we do organize cultural immersions, overnight hiking, multi-day hiking, all the way from Port Edward down to Port St. John's, up to 160 Ks, these kinds of things, and cultural immersions and experiences and exchanges. And as of this year, opening up into more adventurous stuff, hence where the Cathedral Rock came in. So this is the stretch of coastline where I'm primarily focusing on. very close to Port Edward, and you can see here in this image in the bottom right, that is the area that is under threat of mining. It's just very important to note because so much of what we're doing down there is to generate more tourism opportunities so that the sustainable job creation, which will last many lifetimes instead of just things like mining and stuff, which will only last 20 to 25 years and destroy the subsistence nature of the communities. If mining were to happen here, then all the people who depend on this land for their livelihoods would be under threat. People say that they are poor and desperately poor, and yes, financially they are, but they have access to fresh water, grazing land, and they have land to hand over to their children. So in that way, they're actually quite rich. And that needs to be preserved, and that's kind of what we do. And it's these sorts of things that we organize primarily. It's the hiking, long distance hiking overnight, getting to stay and live with the communities, move from village to village as we go down. And we use these villages to actually get to Cathedral Rock, which I'll talk about when we get there. And of course, then bush camping and exploration into the gorges and waterfalls. So quite a lot to see and do in the area. And it was in doing this that I found Cathedral Rock. So let's zoom in a little bit more to where Cathedral Rock is. So you can see on this map here, it is very, very, very isolated. So the closest actual town is Lusikisiki. Lusikisiki itself takes a few days to get to because the roads are incredibly bad. And once you get to Lusikisiki, you have still a few hours drive to Tlutwini village, which is near the valley. And from there, you have about a 7-kilometer hike to actually get to Cathedral Rock itself. Zoom in even further, and you can see this is a typical cliff band which you find on the Wild Coast. It's in the Waterfall Bluff area. Maybe some of you know it. It's very well known. There are only a handful of waterfalls that fall straight into the ocean in the world. And just this stretch of coastline of maybe 20 kilometers has 2, and then further north there's the third one, waterfalls that fall straight into the sea. So Tlutwini village up top, and you can see there where we camped at Blambumkulu Pools, and then Cathedral Rock is this ocean stack off to the side. And there it is. So it's a very grand feature. Geologically speaking, it's rock that is slightly more resistant in places to the mainland itself, which is why it remains where it is. Actually, interestingly enough, here on the left is another Cathedral Rock in the making, which in a few thousand years, I'm sure, maybe even longer than that, will start to resemble something more like Cathedral Rock. Probably a lot more than 1,000 years, actually. And that is it viewed from the land side. So you can see here what an impressive piece of rock it is. And the first few times I saw it, I was always wondering if it was climbable. And there, even before I was a climber, I was looking at it and wondering. And you could see up top, there was a cairn, pile of rocks on top. So I knew that people had been up there, but who had done it, not really sure. This is, over the years, me coming across it and thinking about it. And then I came across the MCSA journal in 2014, where some friends of mine had actually gone and climbed it. And once I'd seen this, I knew that it was possible and could have the beta in order to go and climb it, and started chatting to people to actually figure out how it was possible. And once I started doing this, I started assembling a team of people and offering it out as a trip to go and explore and climb. Katie had been keen to go and explore the area before and some hikes and stuff in the past. And so she was on the list to go and do the climb. So we started prepping it, started figuring out how to do it, how to make it happen. The climb itself from the description is actually the really easy part. There are 2 routes, both of them with a starting pitch of about 10 or 11. And then the second pitches were 15 and 16, which are in traditional climbing terms is quite something. But owing to the isolation of the peak and the difficulty in getting to it, make it a very, very, very adventurous day and a tough thing to actually achieve. As you said, once you're on the stack itself, the climbing is not so hard, but there are many things on the rock that make it hard, such as loose rock. So we got this really wonderful team together of people who were keen to go. There's one person missing from this picture who came and joined us later, but we had quite a nice range of skills, ranging from very experienced through to experienced, but not quite leader experienced, especially in backcountry climbing.
and we divided ourselves up into two teams. We actually trained for quite a bit before. We did time in Bronkhorstspruit, City Rock, practicing all the drills, making sure everyone knew what was going on. And then, in April we set off. Before we got to this stage, though, we had to actually get there. As I say, getting down there is very, very tricky. We planned to drive down in 2 days. Ended up being 3 because we left very late from Joburg and only ended up getting to Kokstad very late in the dark. The road was very terrible, and our second vehicle had 2 blowouts on the road. So we couldn't just change the tire. And then not only that, but the tow truck that came out to fetch us also got a flat tire. So we ended up only getting to Kokstad around midnight on day 1. And of course, Sunday, Kokstad, you're not getting spare parts, you're not getting any garages, nothing. So we just spent the day there, climbed Mount Curry, had a bit of time around there, and eventually got going. And on the next day, made it down actually to Cathedral Rock. So on the next day, we drove through, stayed over in Butwini village at the homestay, and then made the 7-kilometer hike down. And it's quite an easy hike, a few hundred meters of elevation drop, but 7 Ks in total with a heavy pack. We had to use some porters. We had a lot of climbing gear to make it happen. I'll get through the setup of that. We actually have some of the pictures. And this then was the next day. So the plan was to rig all of our safety access stuff on the first day, actually getting down to the peak itself, and then climb the following day. Things were a little bit rushed, though, and that was the first sort of red flag. Because of the day delay that we had, we were just chasing the clock. From the first moment, we were chasing the clock, trying to get this thing done. Day behind schedule, you're working with the tides, which are getting later and later every day. So by the time we got here, we were a little bit in like task-focused game mode, like let's get this thing done. But this video gives quite a nice sense of, just the sort of spectacle of what it was. This is us preparing a fixed line abseil to get down. I'll talk about it later. Very windy, very exposed, and I think, Katie, it was quite overwhelming at that stage as well, right?
Yes, I agree. It was very overwhelming. I've never climbed that close to the ocean before. I did climb by the ocean, but that's Cape Town. That doesn't count. And the terrain was different. There was different rock. Everything was very moist from the wind and the ocean. I was very terrified of what I actually signed up for.
And I'm sure, as you know, when there's lots of wind, when there's lots of noise, it's sort of inversely proportional to your level of concentration and task focus. When you've got lots going on and you're not in an environment, and we had it all under control and everything was safe, but it's very easy to just sort of get kind of a little bit distracted by how many things are going on if you're not used to climbing in these environments. But we were getting there and we were sorting it out. So the plan was, according to the route guide and the chats we'd had with people, and also conversations I'd had with various fishermen in the area, there's a very grassy, steep descent, which is the yellow line visible there, which takes you down sort of footpath, but it's very sketchy. And by far, when we all tested it on the recce day to go and set up ropes, it was myself, Katie, Gert, and Manu. We were the most experienced. And we decided to go down to just check and see how far we could get, if we had to set up ropes, how we could do it. And when we went down that yellow path, we actually realized descending this is a no-go. This is by far the most dangerous part of the trip, because you could have fixed lines, but then we didn't want to set up retrievable abseils, various things. But to do that unaided would have been way too dangerous. So we decided to go to our plan B, which had been set up before, at least in terms of the gear, which was to do a single fixed line abseil on a static rope, which is the blue line dropping straight down the backside there. You can see this image on the right is the fixed line which goes down. And it was a 200-meter line, which made it from top just to above the ocean at the bottom. We used every centimeter of that 200-meter line. It consisted of about 3 abseils with a couple of redirects and rebelays. So once you got onto that line and you descended down, you could kind of just swap out, get past the deviation, and keep going and stay on that line. We kind of thought of it as a highway. We had this line set up which you could just move down and up with a solid fixed anchor up at the top. And this gave us a lot of flexibility and freedom to set things up safely. We then, from the bottom, climbed up and out the yellow line, installing handrails, fixed handrails and safety points so we could actually have a loop, because you don't want to ascend 200 meters all the way on a static line. You want to be able to walk out. So the idea was we could abseil down and walk out on a fixed safety lines all the way up the yellow. So the actual access to the cliff was sorted out on the recce day. We had our fixed line set up. We had our safety line up and out the side. And we were very confident to then bring in the less experienced people, add them to the team, and actually get onto the climb and do it the next day. The next challenge of it is that the tides mean that you have to cross the little channel. It's about 5 meters wide. You'll see a picture of it later. You have to cross that channel either at low tide or 2 hours before low tide, and then you have to get back latest 2 hours after low tide. If you miss that, you can't cross. And then, of course, you have to wait for the next low tides, which means if you get across that and you do not finish the climb and the descent in 4 hours, you have to wait for the next low tide in order to do it, because the block that's in the middle is totally submerged in water, and you don't want to be stuffing around on ropes when you could be swept off a rock. So that was adding a little bit of extra time pressure, but it was all part of the plan. So the next morning, we woke up very, very early. I think we got going at about 4 o'clock. This was at the time when Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and Saturn were all totally lined up. It was very, very beautiful to see in the morning. We all kind of thought of it as a good omen. But I do remember waking up early that morning and straight out of my bivvy, just looking up and seeing this perfect line of these planets and the moon. It really, really was wonderful. So we had stashed most of our gear at the top of the climb. So it was a very easy 1.5K walk to get to the start. We wanted to be crossing at 6 a.m. and we wanted to be crossing back at 10 a.m. Now with 7 people, it takes quite a lot of time to get down that rope. So there was, of course, time for some coffee and some relaxing. We didn't do coffee at camp. We thought, let's get some people down the first abseil, make some coffee while everyone else is coming down. And you can see, I think that's actually you abseiling there, Katie, on the right.
Yeah.
So this is the second last abseil coming down. And they describe it as a very snotty, blocky, chossy arete. And, you know, things are wet and things are loose, but with a fixed line and with paying attention to where you're putting your feet and your hands, everything's fine. It's a sort of known entity, and you know how to deal with it. There on the left, you can see the block that's in the middle. This is super low tide. And that block is what you use to get across onto the base of Cathedral Rock itself. So we all got across. That fixed line obviously staying in place. That's our way out, because you do have to ascend that piece on the left there. And then just to see that the impressive feature from sea level was really quite something. I think we were all really in awe. In the central picture there, you can see Marnu, Gert, and Michelle. I think that's Nathan at the back, all gearing up. So there was a team of 4 and a team of 3 doing 2 separate routes. And then we started climbing. So pitch 1, we all went totally fine, grade 10. Some loose rocks. We were up at the belay stance. We had 2 staggered belay stances. Manu leading team 1 decided to build the stance a little bit lower, and Gert, who led pitch 1, he built a bit higher, and that's what you can see here. That's myself and Gert up at stance 2, and then for team 1 down below. It was at this point when Michelle, who was on my team, started climbing, and a meter off the ground, she grabbed the block, which we had identified as loose, but she still grabbed it. I guess she just, I don't know, in that moment, that came loose, and she actually fell back onto the ground and hurt her ankle. So straight away, we were like, okay, that's something that's just happened. We were now totally task focused on Michelle. We had 2-way radio communications with her, but she was very quiet. So at that point, we should have actually called an all stop. That's one of the big learning experiences of this adventure. We should have called and all stopped and sort of regathered ourselves. Instead, I was focused on my team and getting Michelle, seeing what she's doing. She decided to climb up. We got her up to the stance. By that time, Katie had started leading pitch 2, which was the big pitch, which goes straight. Well, it kind of goes diagonally off to the left, if you saw in the picture. But what happened was, Katie will get to that now when she talks about it. But we got Michelle up to the ledge. She decided she wanted to carry on climbing. She just had a sore ankle, was a little bit shaken up because she had pulled something loose, but she was fine and ready to climb. And while we were sort of dealing with that and trying to make sure she was okay, Katie was quite far on lead on pitch 2. And I think it's a good idea for Katie to take over from here, because that point there is where Katie experienced a little bit of a moment. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm here. So while Michelle was sorted out by Steve and Gert, Mano, my other climber, told me, hey, why don't you look through the route guide to know where you're going? And I said, no, I know exactly where the route's going. It's pretty obvious. It's going up and there. And he said, yes. So off I go, climb, and I went actually up too early. I didn't go left as the route guide said. And I got a little bit too high. I looked into an overhang. I thought, no, something's wrong. Did I miss something in the briefing? Steve didn't mention an overhang. And I actually almost backed out of the route, but I never back out of routes unless I climb it. So I decided to climb right and divert the overhang. And I even tested the rock, pulled it towards me. I thought, okay, this is big, must be solid. And as I do a pull up, the whole block came up. I thought, whoa, okay, sky. And the rope caught me. I thought, yes, that's that. 2 solid anchors. And I just felt a lot of pain. I didn't even see the other rocks that came down. Apparently, there were 2 blocks coming down. And I just heard Michelle shouting, very panicky, are you okay? Are you okay? So I thought, okay, I need to find somebody calm. I didn't say much. And I looked, there was a point where I was hanging horizontally because I fell onto my bum back and I couldn't really sit in the harness like I usually fall into the harness, where you just kind of hang into it. And I tried really hard not to fall upside down because of the pain. And then I had a straight look to my belayer, and he looked really panicked. And I thought, oh, okay, that's not good. And then I saw Steve, and he was very calm and knew what to do. And he lowered me down to the next ledge.
Yeah, so
there you go. So the ledge, which was about 2 meters
just
lower
move it to
than-
the camera. Katie, just move a little bit. People want to see you.
Right, sorry. New voice. Okay, where was I now? The ledge. Okay, so the ledge, I saw a ledge. I thought, yes, okay, there's a ledge, perfect. How do I get down? Okay, so Steve actually took over and told the belayer to lower me down to the ledge, which he made me feel really comfortable and managed to get all the gear from the harness out of the way so I could lie down. And luckily that ledge also had some grass and some vegetation, so it had some insulation pad, which was quite nice.
We can talk about it more. So I'll just explain from our perspective the fall. So we were busying ourselves with, I was readying up to lead the next pitch for my team. And then at that time was just sorting out Michelle, making sure she was okay, when we heard the rocks crumbling and falling behind. And it is a terrifying sound. To hear that amount of noise of rock fall, I think, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it now. What we were quite lucky with is that we were climbing very much diagonally. So that rock fall was not coming over the rest of the climbing team. It was falling straight down into the sea. But as we heard it crumble, we looked back and you could see very large chunks of rock, like microwave-sized rocks just falling down. It was a very big ledge that came down off that rock that Katie had pulled on. And she'd fallen 1 or 2 meters and then impacted a flat flake, which was protruding out of the rock. And why she fell that amount is because of the diagonal nature of the route. Is there was just a little bit more slack in the rope than if it's a straight up climb. So for that rope to come tight and catch her, meaning that she just unluckily hit that ledge before she fully caught the rope. Only once she had slid off that did the rope properly arrest her fall and bring her to rest. And that's when we turned around and saw her and saw that she was in obvious distress and agony, and then got her lowered down to the ledge. I was set up for lead climbing at that point, so got myself across to where Katie was at the ledge and essentially got to work sorting it out. So I think, yeah, this then is really what we had going on for the day. So the fall was at 8:30 in the morning, and I think, yeah, we were there for 8 hours. I looking at the incident report, 6 hours, but on the incident report, you were lifted off 3:30. Yeah. It was a long time. So we had this very short, small ledge. The idea was there was a couple of things going on. Get to Katie, do the first aid. Well, first, obviously, we made sure that everyone was safe and that there was no other falling rocks. Once we had assessed that was fine, we were on lead, got to Katie, did the assessment and made sure she was okay. But it was very worrying because you very quickly noticed that she's got pain in her lower back. And with a back injury, you really only have one option, and that is to keep her as still as possible and make sure she's not moving and she's comfortable. You also then know very quickly on with a back injury in an isolated place like this that there really only is one option to get the person out, and that's with a helicopter. So we built a very solid anchor, made Katie safe. While I was doing that, Gert was busying himself, who's also a rescue team member, with getting the other climbers on the stack off the mountain. And we decided, guys, leave all of your water, leave all of your food, leave all of your jerseys. You guys are going to go onto mainland. You're going to take one of the two-way radios. You're going to stay in visual contact. And there's cell phone signal up top. And then you're going to take this package of information and you're going to call Mountain Rescue, the KZN number. You're going to tell them exactly what's happened. We had one person write down everything that needed to be said. And then we got the next most experienced climber, Marnu, to take everyone out. He had done the exit route the day before. So he got everyone down and out. And it was just myself, Katie, and Gert who stayed on the ledge. The tricky thing being is that it got incredibly hot, although Katie was quite cold to start off with. We used every bit of blanket and cushioning we could find, space blankets and things.
I was quite happy in the sun.
Yeah. Yeah. And as the day progressed, Katie started feeling a bit better. She had full feeling in her toes and her feet, and all of that was fine. But so we started thinking this was probably just muscle impact or bone bruising or something that's not severe because she's not in extreme agony and the pain is subsiding. But then as soon as she would move a bit, because we had to shuffle her and shift her around every 20 minutes or so just to make sure that she was staying comfortable, her pain levels would rise again. But there was a point, I think, where you thought we could self-rescue.
There was a point where I thought, oh, I'm not going to lie here for 6+ hours for rescue. Let me abseil out of it. So I actually stood up and wanted to abseil, but I couldn't even sit up because of the pain. And I remember sitting in the harness was not happening. So the abseil kind of fell out. And then I was really calculating, okay, I need to abseil down and pain. I need to climb the rope, steep terrain up. Okay, 1.5 kilometers to the camp. Okay, car is 7 k's away. And then the next town with the next hospital is plus 30 k's away. Okay, no, let's fly out. Where you
Yeah. So we got KZN MSAR was the first number of call, and each person had this sort of document with them on with the coordinates of Cathedral Rock and who to call and all that. So they were up top making those calls, but KZN was not answering. And so Martin was like, I'm calling Gauteng, which he did. I think Sean was answering that call. Where's Sean? There at the back. So Sean answered that call, and then everything just mobilized from there. It really was a fantastic amount of effort that was put in from the rescue side to get a helicopter out to us. It was the KZN floods at the time, so there was quite a few helicopters based at Virginia Airport in Durban, and they dispatched a BK-117 from Durban to Pietermaritzburg with a long-range fuel tank, landed in Pietermaritzburg, refueled, and picked up 3 KZN MSAR rescuers, and flew straight to Cathedral Rock. And yeah, we were told, okay, helicopters leaving here, it's doing this. We were in constant communication because of our two-way radios, even though mine was starting to get very faulty. I realized because I'd left it in the sun. It doesn't like being left in the sun. And yeah, it eventually arrived that afternoon, just as Katie had fallen asleep listening to some music. I had to wake her up to say, no, the helicopter's coming. So one of the hardest things is just actually staying busy and keeping yourself entertained and motivated on a ledge like this, where you're just sitting there waiting. And the less you do, the more your brain starts to play the worst case scenarios. So Gert and I tried our best to keep Katie entertained. Only realizing we could play music later on in the day was a big idiot move. We should have been playing music the whole time, because as soon as we did, got quite comfortable. And then we built really extensive rigging. We cleared up the site extensively, made it ready for helicopter. The rescuers who were coming through knew that there were 2 qualified MSAR rescue team members on the ledge. So they were quite comfortable with being able to drop things down to us and have us even package the patient, package Katie. So I think, that was actually the important thing. Was the moment that happened, Katie was also, part of the rescue team. The moment it happened, she was not a rescue team member. She was a patient, which, we were keeping her involved in everything, but she wanted to help. It's like, no, I'm sorry, this is not, you are just lying here, you're staying still. And we built very elaborate things to keep her comfortable on the ledge. And we kept ourselves entertained and happy. This was, I think, Katie was feeling the strongest, right before she decided she wanted to actually self-rescue. But then we convinced her, no, listen, not convinced her, we told her not happening. And then I even played the scenario. I said, all right, let's play this out. We call and we say, no, we're going to self-rescue. Katie is fine. Cancel the helicopter. Boom. Now all of a sudden we're descending, and bang, your pain is back, or something worse happens. There's no more helicopter. It's not happening. So that was quite an effective way of saying, let's just stick to the plan. You got a free Uber coming, just like, So eventually the helicopter arrived. It was quite a bit later than expected, but I guess, things are going to be later than expected. That's just the nature of these things. And it was a very far way for them to fly. A helicopter did come earlier, but it wasn't the right chopper. So we heard it coming. We thought they were early. We were so excited, and then we just heard it disappear into the distance. But then this one eventually did arrive, and then we'll run you through the actual process of what happened with the helicopter. So he flies in, obviously approaching the coordinates, and then he obviously saw us, and then he started doing big loops just to get an idea of what was happening in the area, get the lay of the land, figure out what he was going to do. His intention was to do a couple of circuits, see what he was going to do, and then he started with a very steady, slow speed approach from the seaside over the stack itself. And then it got a little bit worrying for us on the ledge, because twice he waved off. And I was with Katie. Gert was standing. You can kind of see him on the right of the ledge there. And he's watching this heli, and he's showing him, this is where we are. And the pilot's not happy. And he just kept waving. So what we were worried about is that the conditions were not right. He was cautious of, which we were also cautious of, him hovering over in that downwash now bringing things on top of us. So he had to come in over above us. And they have a really long hoist, these helis, but it was still about 40 meters from the clear height up top to get down to us. So he really was just scoping out the area and checking it out. But then eventually he made a pass. He came in at the right height. He came in at the right speed. And he came in over the top of us. We were sheltering Katie to make sure no other rocks were coming down. We were trying to stay as close to the wall as possible. And first thing they did was deliver the technical medic. So I think her name was Isabella. Yeah, Isabella. Yeah. Okay, so we are here on this ledge there. And Isabella, in this video, she's here. She's being lowered onto this ledge there. She meets her shadow. That's what she thinks about. She gets down to the ledge. She's a doctor, a trained doctor, so she was the first responding medic. She had a medical bag. She then got down to us on the ledge. We had all the safety stuff rigged up, ready for her, so she could just clip in and get to work. While that was happening, Simon, the technical, with the stretcher, was lowered down onto the ledge afterwards. And then the BK went and landed up top, pretty much behind where this camera viewpoint is, when Carl Dreyer got out, and then he was the sort of rescue organizer on scene. He was the guy directing things and making sure things were going according to plan. So 3 people, plus the engineer on the heli and the pilot that had flown in from Durban and Pietermaritzburg. And that's just a photo of it there. So we then got work. I think you want to talk through some of the stuff, so the patient treatment and medical stuff.
It was interesting to be a patient, absolutely. Nice to get a different perspective on the rescue. I got some pain medication, which was great. And just kind of let them do the work, which was also good. There's not really much to say.
Yeah.
They didn't even lift me onto the stretcher. They actually wanted me to move onto the stretcher because I was in so much pain. And they didn't have much space to actually lift me without falling off the ledge themselves. So there's more of a self-lift.
Yeah, what we did is we had the stretcher secured to the anchor and Katie secured to the anchor, and then it was a combination of keeping her still and lifting her up and then sliding the stretcher underneath. There really wasn't much space to move around, and it's a very sharp drop off on the right. So we got Katie onto the stretcher. We put as much padding as we could around her because it was very flat, uncomfortable stretcher. And then what happened next was we ready for Katie to be hoisted out. So the BK fires up, comes around again, does the same approach, comes in really slow, and then he lowered the hoist to pick up Katie in the stretcher and Isabella as the jockey. The challenge that came next was what we do to prevent the spin of the stretcher is to have a tagline in order to stop the stretcher spinning. But in order for that to be really effective, you need to actually have some distance from the center of gravity so that if the stretcher spins, you can arrest its spin by holding that line. If you're directly beneath it, it's a big challenge because it can still spin even though you're holding the tagline. So the correct protocol is what should happen is when they connect is they actually pull away a bit to give you that distance, which they did, but it wasn't quite enough. You didn't spin it all like mad. It was fine. It worked for a while, but you could see towards the end in the video, you'll see it started developing a bit of a spin. This is what it looks like having the heli come in above you. And that hoist hook also, they tell us, they're like, okay, guys, let that thing touch the ground first. The static shock is insane that generates itself on that thing. So if you just grab the hoist hook, you get whacked. So you have to let it touch the ground first. This was KZN's system, like let it touch the ground. I wasn't too happy with that because of entanglement and stuff, but they were running it, so it's like cool. They let it touch the ground, discharge, then they grab it. And then we hooked up. You can see this is the tagline coming off to the side. So I'm operating the actual tagline itself. It is in no way fixed or attached to anything on the ground or myself. It is purely myself holding the line. And then it's got a weak point. You can see it's got this yellow lanyard, which has got just a simple buckle. So if at any point there's a problem, the jockey can disconnect that because it's never fully attached to anything, because that would be a huge problem if the helicopter was attached. So you'll notice her hand, I don't know if it was intentional, but it was very close to that buckle at all times, ready to go. And this next video is where you see it start to develop a little bit of a spin, which was not practiced. As you can see, the tagline is almost directly beneath it, so there's very little you can do in that sense. Yeah, and Simon there, who's the technical, obviously stopped filming at that point because he was also realizing he needed to focus up. And then, then Katie was low down to the ground and reunited with her dog Luca. This is my favorite photo of the whole thing.
Yeah, so I took my dog Luca along. Obviously, he wasn't climbing. He was waiting on the mainland. He was so happy to see me. He licked my whole face and licked everybody's hands. So happy. I had to say goodbye though quick and told him to stay with Steve and that he will be okay. He even barked at the helicopter and was wondering why it didn't fly away, because he always barks at birds and they usually fly away.
He was very well behaved afterwards. He knew exactly what he was doing. But when we got back to camp, you have to cross the river to get there. And then he just kept going back to the river and sitting and waiting. And we had to go and call him and say, no, come, we're sitting here. And he'd come for a while and then go back. And then he's like, so Katie was then flown. It was about an hour and a half's flight back to Durban. And they then got back with fumes. The pilot was really quite stressed in terms of how much fuel was actually left in the helicopter. Even though they refueled in Pietermaritzburg and had a long-range tank, the amount of hovering and flying they were doing was pushing that consumption to the limit. So much so that when they got to the final stop, well, when they went to go Pietermaritzburg to drop off Simon and Isabella, he had to approach the runway as if he was coming in for a fixed-wing landing. And he's telling Simon, he's like, once wheels touch, you guys are out of here and I'm taking off again. It was like, just stop, jump and roll, like get out, because he had to get back to Durban and it was flashing, like it was super low. Yeah. And also daylight was a bit of a problem by that stage. Yeah, that's the heli there. That's it landed. You can see Katie about to be put back in. And then Gert and I were lucky enough to get a lift out as well. We were planning to descend and climb out. The tide by that stage was going to be okay for us. But the pilot was happy to go and hoist myself and Gert out, which was a pretty unique experience to be hoisted out of Cathedral Rock as the sun is setting, which was quite amazing. And then, on the next day, the three of us were able to go and get the summit, retrieve the gear, which was quite a weird experience to just climb through a place where something like that has happened, to be back on that ledge, really aware of what had just happened the day before. And on that ledge, Katie and I had spoken about returning to make sure that we do get the summit, which is definitely going to happen next year because we can't let them up. And that was a great motivator to keep her excited on the ledge. So we will return and. All right. Thank you. That's our answer.
Sure. All right, let's just stop the share there. Right. We'll start with some questions from the live audience, and we'll move to some questions online. For the guys that are online, just type any questions you have into the chat, and Lewis will share it with us. And yeah, let's any questions? Yes. So, guys, just a quick one, just so that everybody online can hear the question. We'll just repeat it, and then obviously back again. So the question is, what painkillers?
So I was given the green whistle first. I hated the taste. I just coughed it up and asked for something better. I don't know what they gave me for the second one, but it felt much better.
Daisy, tell us, what were your extensive injuries? What did you actually have at the end? How long was your recovery period? And have you got any long-term?
The question is, what the actual injury? What happened? What is the consequence of that, and any long-term effects? And are you still any problems?
So I've hit the rock twice. Yes, unfortunately. Hit it kind of so I fractured my coccyx. Luckily, it was just the base of the spine, and I smashed my ankle into the rock somehow, so that is sprained. The ankle is still a bit sore in like severe flexion movements. I can still feel the back a little bit, and my lower back flexibility is coming along slightly with doing yoga. Yeah, so I still feel it a little bit, but my strength is coming back with regular.
Mariam.
My question is for Steve. What was your big takeaway? There were probably quite a few, but in terms of what you're
The question is,
Yeah.
what was your key takeout?
So I think the number one thing was that when